With a mocking laugh, she tore the medal from the female guard's uniform, calling it a cheap trinket. The crowd froze in horror. But she had no idea that polished metal carried a story of sacrifice that would soon leave her in tears. The July sun beat down on Arlington National Cemetery, a relentless, shimmering heat that baked the Virginia hills. It bleached the white headstones until they seemed to radiate a light of their own, stretching in silent, perfect rows toward the horizon. The air was thick with the scent of meticulously cut grass and the heavy, profound silence of a place built on sacrifice. It was a silence broken only by the reverent whispers of tourists and the rhythmic, hypnotic click, clack, click, clack of a soldier's boots on stone. At the heart of it all, before the tomb of the unknown soldier, stood Sergeant Anya Petrova. At 30 years old, she was a figure carved from discipline and duty. Her sentinel blue uniform was flawless, the creases sharp enough to cut glass. Beneath her perfectly positioned cap, her blonde hair was coiled into a severe, immaculate bun, not a single strand daring to escape. Her posture was a testament to thousands of hours of training, her gaze fixed forward, unwavering, her face a mask of serene neutrality. Hidden behind sunglasses, her eyes saw everything and nothing. Pinned to her left breast was the Distinguished Service Cross. Its silver surface, adorned with an eagle, captured the harsh sunlight, a single, brilliant point of light against the dark wool of her uniform. It wasn't just a decoration, it was a testament, a scar, a piece of her soul forged in the crucible of chaos half a world away. The crowd was a typical summer mix, families trying to instill a sense of history in their restless children, veterans in faded caps who stood a little straighter here, and curious travelers ticking a landmark off their list. Among them, a voice, sharp and discordant as a cracking whip, sliced through the respectful hush. "This is utterly absurd," Evelyn Reed announced, her crisp, Upper East Side accent carrying across the plaza. She turned to her teenage daughter, Chloe, who was trying to shrink into the fabric of her oversized band t-shirt. "I paid a fortune for a private heritage tour, and they have us standing in this heat like we're waiting for a bus. Can you believe it, Chloe?" Chloe, clutching a pamphlet about Arlington's history as if it were a shield, flushed a deep crimson. "Mom, please," she whispered, her eyes darting around at the disapproving glances they were attracting. "People are staring." "Let them stare," Evelyn snapped, adjusting the angle of her designer sunglasses. She smoothed the front of her tailored linen blazer, a cascade of gold bangles clattering on her wrist. As the CEO of a high-end tech accessories company, Evelyn Reed was a woman accustomed to a world that bent to her will. Her frequent trips to Asia had built her an empire on sleek, minimalist design and mass-produced perfection, but they had also instilled in her a profound cynicism for anything that felt old, ceremonial, or inefficient. She pulled out her latest model smartphone, her manicured nails tapping impatiently on the screen. "Richard, it's Evelyn Reed," she said, her voice loud enough to make a nearby couple flinch. "Yes, I'm at Arlington." "No, the red carpet has not been rolled out. I specifically told your agency I expect a VIP experience. I am a platinum donor to the American Heritage Foundation, for God's sake. I've had cocktails with senators. Now I'm stuck in a queue with, well, with everyone." Chloe wished the earth would swallow her whole. Her gaze fell upon an elderly man in a wheelchair, wearing a Korean War veteran cap. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but his eyes, fixed on her mother, were sharp and clear. He was Mr. Harrison, and he watched Evelyn's performance with a quiet, unnerving stillness. Chloe offered him a weak, apologetic smile. He simply gave a slow, understanding nod in return, a silent acknowledgement that some battles are fought not with weapons, but with patience. "Richard, this is unacceptable," Evelyn continued, her free hand gesturing dramatically. "I sit on the board of my co-op in Manhattan. Do you have any idea how many foreign dignitaries I've hosted at my summer galas?" She paused, listening for a moment before cutting in again. "Well, find someone who can fix this. That's what I pay you for, isn't it?" Snapping her phone shut, she pushed her way closer to the tomb, her expensive sandals clicking on the hallowed stone. Her critical gaze landed on Anya, standing motionless at her post. "Well," she said, loud enough for the entire plaza to hear, "at least they've provided some entertainment while we wait." She positioned herself directly in front of the guard, studying Anya's uniform with the disdain of a fashion critic at a low-budget runway show. "Chloe, come look at this girl's outfit," she commanded. "This is precisely what I mean about America clinging to these outdated traditions. All this pomp and circumstance while the rest of the world innovates." Leo, the tour guide, a patient man in his 40s with a weary smile, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if I may, the tomb guard's uniform is a symbol of the highest honor, designed to—" "Oh, spare me the history lesson," Evelyn interrupted with a dismissive wave. "I've done my research. These uniforms are purely for show. They probably haven't changed the design in a century because the military adores its little costumes." She turned to the crowd, as if she were a professor addressing a class of slow-witted students. "Back in the world of business, we'd call this a branding exercise. A very expensive, very dusty branding exercise." Chloe, now standing reluctantly beside her mother, winced. "Mom, I don't think that's right. In my AP history class, we learned—" "Chloe, please," Evelyn cut her off, her voice laced with condescension. "Who pays for that fancy private school tuition?" "Exactly." She straightened her blazer, her tone shifting into a lecture. "Now, as I was saying, these guards aren't really soldiers in the active sense. They're performers. Actors playing a part for us tourists." She gestured toward Anya, her gold bangles glinting. "And those medals? Pure theater. Probably made in a factory in Shenzhen. I'd know. I have suppliers there who can produce identical-looking metalwork for pennies on the dollar." A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Mr. Harrison's hands tightened on the arms of his wheelchair. A man in a polo shirt shook his head, muttering to his wife, "She's crossed a line." His wife nodded, pulling their young son a little closer. Evelyn, emboldened by the attention, leaned closer to Anya. "I'll let you all in on a little industry secret," she said, her voice a conspiratorial stage whisper. "These things are mass-produced. I bet this one," she pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the Distinguished Service Cross on Anya's chest, "is worth about $15 at a military surplus store. If that." "Chloe, come see," Evelyn insisted, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "It's just like those corporate awards your father keeps in his office, though his are probably made of actual silver." "Mom, please," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of shame and desperation. "We should go. The tour of the Lincoln Memorial starts in 20 minutes. "Just a moment, dear," Evelyn said, her tone patronizingly sweet. "I'm providing you with a real-world education in discerning value." She took a decisive step forward, ignoring the brass chains and the stenciled signs that read, "Silence and Respect." She was now within arm's length of the motionless guard. The air grew thick with unspoken protest. The crowd held a collective breath. Leo, the guide, started to move forward, but a subtle shake of the head from Mr. Harrison stopped him. This was a confrontation that had to play out. With a swift, shockingly confident motion, Evelyn reached out. Her fingers, adorned with a large, cushion-cut diamond, closed around the Distinguished Service Cross. Rip. The sound was small but obscene in the profound silence. It was the sound of sturdy threads, sewn with military precision, breaking. The sound of a boundary being violated. Evelyn plucked the metal from Anya's uniform as if she were picking a piece of lint. She held it up to the light, dangling it from its ribbon, turning it between her thumb and forefinger like a cheap keychain. "See," she announced, her voice ringing with the smugness of someone who believed they had just proven a fundamental truth about the world. "Costume jewelry. Probably a zinc alloy with a silver-colored coating. Made in China, just like half the things I import." The crowd gasped. It was an audible, unified intake of breath, a sound of shared shock and outrage. Chloe's hands flew to her mouth, tears of humiliation finally spilling down her cheeks. Mr. Harrison closed his eyes for a moment, his jaw tight. Oblivious, or perhaps simply indifferent to the wave of revulsion she had caused, Evelyn gave the medal a casual flick of her wrist. It flew from her fingers, arcing through the air for a brief moment before landing on the stone plaza with a sharp, metallic ping. The sound echoed, a lonely, tinny note of desecration that sent a shudder through every onlooker. "There," Evelyn said, glancing at her gold watch. "Now we all know the truth." She turned to her daughter. "Come on, Chloe. We're late for our dinner reservation." But before she could take a single step, a sound stopped her cold. It was a deliberate shift of polished leather on stone. The faint, almost imperceptible creak of a uniform that had been utterly still for hours. Evelyn turned back, her expression of smug satisfaction faltering into one of confusion, then surprise. Sergeant Anya Petrova had moved. The world seemed to slow down. The sun, the heat, the murmuring crowd, it all faded into the background. Every eye was locked on Sergeant Petrova. She executed a precise quarter turn, her movements slow, deliberate, and imbued with a purpose so profound it felt like a physical force. She was no longer a statue, she was a sentinel powered by something ancient and formidable. She faced the spot where her medal lay on the ground, its silver surface now dulled by a smudge of dust from Evelyn's shoe. With the same unhurried precision that defined her every step, Anya lowered herself to one knee. The crowd watched, mesmerized. It was not the posture of defeat, but of reverence. Her white-gloved hands, which had remained perfectly still for so long, reached for the medal. She didn't snatch it, she gathered it, cradling it in her palm as if it were a fragile, wounded bird. Evelyn stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape, her brain struggling to process this impossible break in protocol. The guards weren't supposed to move. They weren't supposed to react. They were part of the scenery. The crowd instinctively formed a loose, silent circle around the scene. Parents pulled their children close, not in fear, but in witness. Phones that had been eagerly snapping photos were lowered, a spontaneous gesture of respect. Mr. Harrison's eyes glistened, his hands trembling slightly on the arms of his wheelchair. Leo the guide stood silently, his clipboard forgotten at his side. Anya lifted the medal gently. She remained on one knee, her head bowed over the object in her hand. Her face remained unreadable, but her focus was absolute. She reached into an inner pocket of her uniform and produced a small, pristine white handkerchief. With movements that were slow, almost ritualistic, she began to clean the medal. Each stroke of the cloth was a deliberate act. She polished the silver eagle, wiped the dust from the ribbon, and gently cleaned the edges. It was an act of restoration, of purification. She was polishing not just a piece of metal, but a memory, a promise, an entire history. The crowd watched in absolute, unbroken silence. A young girl clutched her mother's hand, her eyes wide with a dawning understanding that she was seeing something sacred. Chloe's quiet sobs were the only sound, each one a punctuation mark in the heavy stillness. Even Evelyn's confident posture had crumbled. Her hands fidgeted with her bangles, the gold now seeming gaudy and cheap. Her inspection complete, Anya rose to her full height. The medal rested in her open palm. For a long moment, she simply looked at it, the weight of its story seeming to settle onto her shoulders, a burden she carried with immense grace. Then, she lifted her other hand and slowly, deliberately, removed her sunglasses. For the first time, the crowd saw her eyes. They were a startlingly clear blue, and they burned with an intensity that spoke of sleepless nights, of battles fought in dust-choked landscapes, and of lives lost in the blink of an eye. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and clear, carrying the quiet authority of someone who never had to raise it to be heard. "This medal," Anya said, holding it up so the sunlight caught its polished surface, "is not a prop. It's not a souvenir. It is not something you would find in a market stall." Her words were perfectly enunciated, each one landing like a carefully placed stone in the silent plaza. "This is the Distinguished Service Cross. It was awarded to me for actions during the evacuation of Kabul, Afghanistan. August 26, 2021. The crowd leaned in, captivated. Evelyn's face had drained of all color, her earlier bravado evaporating like mist in the sun. Chloe edged away from her mother, her gaze fixed on Anya, her tears momentarily forgotten. Our mission was to hold a perimeter at a temporary embassy collection point, Anya continued, her gaze distant, as if she were seeing a different landscape, one of smoke, and chaos, and desperation. We were there to help evacuate civilians. American citizens, Afghan allies, their families. Intelligence said the area was secure. Her jaw tightened, the only outward sign of the emotion churning beneath the surface. They were wrong. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mr. Harrison nodded slightly, his own memories of another war, another chaotic retreat, flickering in his eyes. The first explosion hit the outer wall just after dawn, Anya said. It was chaos. We lost radio contact with the main force at the airport. Reinforcements were an hour away, but it felt like a lifetime. The civilians were caught in the open. Women, children, elderly people who couldn't run. Her thumb traced the edge of the metal, lingering on a small, almost invisible dent. Our commanding officer was hit in the first wave. Both our medics went down trying to reach him. We were on our own. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth again, this time in horror. Evelyn's eyes darted between her daughter and Anya, her expression a mask of dawning, sickening realization. Someone had to stay with the wounded, Anya said, her voice softer now, but no less powerful. I had combat lifesaver training. We set up a casualty collection point in a bombed-out basement. She paused, her fingers closing briefly around the metal. For 6 hours, we held that position. 18 wounded civilians, a handful of us to protect them, and limited supplies. The youngest was a little girl, maybe 7 years old. She had shrapnel in her arm. She never cried. She just held on to my sleeve. The crowd was motionless, hanging on her every word. A man in a veteran's cap slowly removed it, holding it over his heart. When the helicopters finally came, evacuation under fire was chaos, Anya said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. The wounded had to be moved fast, prioritized, all while we were taking fire from the surrounding buildings. My best friend, Corporal Davis, was coordinating from the rooftop. He spotted a sniper team on an adjacent building, pinning down the landing zone. Anya's voice faltered for the first time, a flicker of raw grief crossing her face. He could have taken cover. He could have waited. Instead, he exposed himself to draw their fire, giving the first helicopter a window to land. She took a shaky breath. Michael Davis didn't make it off that roof. Neither did Specialist Chen or Private Miller, who died trying to pull him back. She held the metal higher, its significance now a crushing weight in the air. This metal belongs to them as much as it does to me. My family has served for generations. My grandfather at Incheon, my father in Desert Storm. This connects me to them, to their sacrifice. She looked directly at Evelyn, her gaze steady but not accusatory. It was simply a statement of fact. Every mark on this metal tells a story. This dent, she pointed to the small impression, was from a piece of shrapnel that hit the wall next to me while I was shielding that little girl. This smudge, she indicated a faint, dark stain that the handkerchief hadn't quite removed, is blood. It might be mine, it might be Corporal Davis's. I'll never know. So, no, ma'am, she concluded, her voice resonating with the quiet power of absolute truth. This is not a trinket. It is not made in China. It is forged from American courage and sealed with American blood. It is a piece of my history, my comrades' history, and my nation's history. And it deserves respect. Evelyn's carefully constructed world shattered. A choked, nervous laugh escaped her lips, a sound sharp and horribly out of place. Well, she began, her voice thin and reedy, I'm sure it's all very dramatic, when you put it that way. But the words died on her lips as she met her daughter's gaze. Chloe's face was streaked with tears, but her expression was one of clear, devastating judgment. It was a look of revelation, the moment a child sees their parent not as an infallible giant, but as a flawed, small human being. That look hit Evelyn harder than any public condemnation. Evelyn tried again, her hand rising to her throat, the diamonds on her wrist suddenly feeling like shackles. You have to understand. I didn't know. Her voice trailed off as she finally, truly, saw the crowd. Dozens of faces stared back, some with disgust, others with pity, but none with the admiration she had spent her life cultivating. Her shoulders, always held so high, sagged. The men you mentioned, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Your friends, the ones who didn't come home. She swallowed hard, the reality of those names, those lives, finally sinking in. In my world, we don't. I've never known anyone who. She gestured helplessly toward the medal, unable to finish the thought. I didn't realize. Mr. Harrison wheeled himself forward a few feet. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of decades. Ma'am, he said, his eyes locked on Evelyn's. Some things in this world have a weight you can't measure on a spreadsheet. You learn that weight by seeing what this young woman has seen. Or you learn it by showing respect for those who have. His gaze softened slightly. The good news is, it's never too late to learn. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, her expensive mascara beginning to run. I didn't realize, she repeated, her voice breaking, the words raw and unguarded. Is there any way I can make this right? Anya's expression remained unreadable. She turned away without a word, her movements precise, and began reattaching the medal to her uniform. She threaded the pin through the torn fabric, adjusted the ribbon, and pressed it flat against her chest. To the crowd, it was more than a gesture. It was a restoration of order, of dignity, of honor. Please, Evelyn said, stepping forward again, her composure gone. I need to apologize properly. I need you to know I understand now. Mom, Chloe interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. She placed a hand on Evelyn's arm. He's back on duty. He can't respond. It's time for us to go. Evelyn turned to her daughter, truly seeing her for the first time that day, not as an accessory, but as a person with her own moral compass. But I need to, she pleaded. Look at him, Mom, Chloe said gently. Really look. The ceremony, the tradition, it's continuing. That's what matters now. Not your apology. Two uniformed security officers approached, their steps purposeful but calm. Ma'am, the first officer said, addressing Evelyn. We're going to need you to come with us. Evelyn nodded, offering no resistance. Yes, of course, she whispered. She looked back at Anya one last time, her motionless form a stark, silent rebuke to the chaos she'd unleashed. As the officers escorted a humbled Evelyn Reed toward the exit, her daughter following with her head held a little higher, the crowd began to disperse. But they left differently than they had arrived. Parents were explaining to their children not just what they saw, but what it meant. Couples held hands a little tighter. Veterans stood a little straighter. The incident was over, but its impact rippled through the quiet air, a lesson learned in the harshest way possible. What do you do when your reality is shattered by a truth you never considered? Is an apology ever enough when you've disrespected something sacred? If this story touched you, please like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that explore the moments that define us. Drop a comment below and share a time a moment shifted how you viewed a tradition or a symbol. Please, comment with respect. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to read today.